Hey everyone. I'm Alicia, and I am one of Nico's virtual assistants.
And I am Bob, another one of Nico's assistants. Hi.
In this video, we are going to show you how to spice up your cinematic cues by adding some woodwinds in the context of a piece for strings.
Today, a lot of production music, mostly in the trailer and the bombastic epic genres, completely obliterate the woodwinds. This sucks. Everyone likes woodwinds, and you should totally use them more often in your compositions. If you disagree, you are part of the problem, and I'm done talking to you.
We are not classically trained at all. So, if you are looking for the academic way of writing, this video may not be for you. This is just the way we do it with our limited knowledge. With that said, let's get to it. We have some ground to cover.
To demonstrate the use of woodwinds, I set up a basic chord progression: A minor, F major, D minor and E major. Everything is in the key of A minor to keep things easy. This is how it sounds. Nothing complicated. We will keep things as simple as possible, as we know that for a few of the people watching these videos, the light is on but nobody's home.
I took this chord progression and distributed it to the string players. Let's look at the violas first. They will provide the rhythmic backbone of this short cue. Look at the expression map below to see that it's not just spiccato. Let's take a listen.
Then, we have the first divisi of the cellos. They don't do much. I'm wondering what we are paying them for. They are just here to highlight the beats and provide more projecting power to the violas. They at least alternate between two kinds of short notes. I'm using the BBC Symphony Orchestra for the strings. If the players from the orchestra could hear what their sampling sessions are used for, they would probably kill themselves. That's how they sound together with the violas.
The second cello divisi is simply playing the root note of the chords, and they are doubled by the basses. Hence the name, double basses. And this is how they sound with the rhythm section. Lastly, I wrote a quick melody on top with the violins. Here it is. The first and second violins are playing the melody in octaves. Nothing fancy. It just works.
Let's have a quick listen of all the strings playing together. This short cue works very well on its own. If you don't think so, don't worry. You have no taste, and that is okay. This is the basis that we are going to use, as we will try to enhance it with a woodwind section.
Also, before we look at the woodwinds, I made a short playlist on Spotify. These are cues that features woodwinds the way I like them. I often use these tracks as references. The first piece, Table for Two, is my favorite movie score of all times. A link to the playlist is in the description below, And don't hesitate to share your favorite tracks in the comments.
The most common instruments that you will find in a woodwind section are the flute, the oboe, the clarinet, and the bassoon. Keep this in mind if you are shopping for a woodwind section. Let's first look at the flute. One of the most common and easiest use for the flute is to double the strings melody. This is what I have done here. I simply copied the MIDI part from the violins to the flute. Pay attention to the gaps between some notes. They are here to simulate the player breathing. We wouldn't want our flautist to die from asphyxiation. To roughly simulate the player's breath in the instrument, we can use CC1 on the long notes. It starts strong and slowly decreases during a phrase. As the player takes a breath, they can start blowing stronger again in the flute. Let's listen. Now, let's check how this sounds with the violins. It provides a different color to our melody. It makes it softer, but also more present. Here I doubled the violins, but the flute is suited to double any of the string instruments. The oboe can be used for the same purpose. It makes our melody sounds a bit more majestic. It is also not uncommon to have both the flute and the oboe double the violins, sometimes in octaves. Now the clarinet. Its range is quite large. It can be used both in the low and the high registers. Here I use a clarinet to double the viola's part. The clarinet is also used quite often to double the cellos. This is why I added a second one here to layer with the second cello divisi. Coming last, the bassoon. It can have a lot of different use too, but here I chose to double the basses with it. Let's now listen to the whole section. It is not the best use of our woodwinds and we are about to see better ways to go about this. By the way, the volume of the woodwinds is a bit loud compared to the strings, but I wanted to make sure that you hear them. Let's listen to both sections playing together. In this scenario, I used the woodwinds to provide a different color to the strings. They are just a layer and are not doing anything interesting other than providing more mass to our cue.
The previous example was a bit underwhelming, but simply doubling the strings helps make the cue sound bigger. Let's try something a little bit more interesting. Here I used the flute to provide a new layer that is not played by any of the strings. It is something between a counter melody and a texture element. The idea is to provide some movement to the main melody by taking a bit of the listener's focus away from it. I found this to work very well in scenarios where you are scoring a scene and the melody is a little bit too prominent. Instead of simplifying the strings melody and taming it, we take the attention away from it. We can also double the flute part with the clarinet. Woodwinds are really good at doubling each other, and I can't think of a combination that wouldn't work well. Clarinets doubling oboes, flutes doubling bassoons, and so on. Anything goes. It is up to you to find the color that you like the most. And just as we did before, I layered the melody with the oboe. I really like this combination of tones. A device that gets used quite often as well as to double the strings melody with the bassoon. 1 or 2 octaves apart. It helps to ground the melody within the whole arrangement. As if you are saying, this is the main melody, and I mean it. Now, let's listen to everyone playing together. You will hear that the feeling is very different than in the first example. Not only it sounds bigger, it also sounds more developed. Yet, we didn't have to do much for that. Did you notice? In this particular example, the little counter melody is overtaking the melody. This is because the flute is playing in a high register, and the ear tends to focus on the highest pitch. Let's mute the flute and listen to this one more time. Note how this changes everything once again. And now the melody takes the front seat again. Let's move on to the next example.
This one is pretty simple. Up until now, we have used the woodwinds in a supporting role. We didn't really give them a prominent role. So, I removed the melody line from the violins and instead, I have the second violins play the third of each chord. The first violins will play the fifth. The melody is now given to the entire woodwind section. Each instrument is playing it, spanning multiple octaves. This makes our cue much brighter. The woodwinds is the most agile section of the orchestra. They are really good at playing fast passages with a lot of short notes. They are very suited for playing runs too. Let's look at what the flute could do here. It starts with short notes going down within the current chord, and then it is followed by a run also playing within the current chord. I'm using the BBCSO woodwinds, and they don't have a dedicated runs articulation, so I am just using the legato for this demo. A dedicated runs library would most likely work better here. If you are interested by runs libraries, there are a few of them out there. Woodwinds by Cinesamples and Palette Runs and ARPs by Red Room Audio come to mind. Also check the CC1 data here. It follows the shape of the run.
The oboe is also playing a short notes pattern. Actually, two oboes, but I wrote both voices into the same MIDI event, for the sake of brevity. And also because when blended within the orchestra, no one will ever notice. The same goes for the clarinet, which is doubling the oboe.
I have also added a new instrument that we haven't seen before, the bass clarinet. It is also playing a different short notes pattern still within the boundaries of the current chord. Pay attention to the articulation switches at the bottom. This helps to provide a more lively performance. And I also doubled the bass clarinet with the bassoon. I really like the combined sound of these two instruments. You should too. Another instrument that we haven't used in the previous examples, the contrabassoon. I use it to give more balls to the bottom end. Speaking of balls, did you know that I don't have hair on mine? It's because hair doesn't grow on steel. And yet another new instrument, the piccolo. To be quite honest, I am not a fan of the piccolo. It's too piercing for my taste. Still, I like to use it for decorative purpose. Here, it is just doing some rips and falls. I've added it to show you how agile the woodwinds can be. Let's have all these guys playing together like one big happy family. And finally, let's check how this sounds with the strings. More people, more fun, more interest, more chances to have your cue selected by a publisher, more chances of placement, more money, more booze. I hope that by now you see why woodwinds are important and why you should totally use them and abuse them.
This concludes this short video on woodwinds. I hope that you found it useful and that it gave you some ideas to experiment with woodwinds in your pieces. In closing, I will play you one of my tracks that features exposed woodwinds passages. It is using Cinesamples Cine Winds. Happy compassing, everyone. Hey Bob,
Yeah?
next time don't talk to them about your balls.
Why?